All right, section 3, which is going to be on factories and unions. Factories and unions became really big during the Gilded Age because factory workers needed to be around to produce all these items that were needed, and a lot of these new immigrants coming into the country worked in factories. Now, life in a factory was not always very easy because the power was in the hands of the owner and the boss, and the worker had no power because if there was something that they wanted, they couldn't ask for it because they were easily fired and replaced. Factory owners and factory managers back then literally could walk out on the street and hire anybody coming off of a boat from any country and walk them right into a job and get them to do it. So if you worked in a factory, there were a few problems, or a lot of problems actually in them. These weren't in every factory, but a lot of these did exist. First of all, child labor. Some families couldn't afford to let their kids go to school. So factories would have kids working in them as young as 5 years old. And if you think about it, if you're working in a factory when you're 5, you're probably going to work in a factory your whole life because you're never going to get an education, and so you're not going to be able to better yourself. These kids were asked to do really dangerous jobs on machines that didn't fit them, and a lot of times kids were asked to do things that were definitely unsafe and could get them killed. One story that I read one time that is disgusting is there was a factory in, I believe it was Pennsylvania, that hired kids to once an hour go inside the machines and use an oil gun to oil down the pieces. A warning bell would ring 30 seconds before the machine would start, and after 30 seconds the machine would fire up and get going again. So this little girl, I think she was 6, goes into the machine with her little grease gun, and she's shooting the grease gun, and the little bell rings, and she tries to leave the machine, and her ponytail gets caught in the gears. Now her mom was working the machine and tried to get her daughter out, but after 30 seconds the machine started up with no way to stop it, and as the gears cranked, it pulled the girl's ponytail further and further in until it crushed her skull and killed her on the spot. The factory owner, out of the goodness of his heart, allowed the family the rest of the day off to grieve, but told them they wanted to see them back there the next day. When the next paycheck period came up, they were not paid because when the little girl's skull went through the gears of the machine, it broke a gear, and the gear needed to be replaced, so they paid for the gear that their daughter's death broke. But there were a lot of unfair business practices as well. You might work an 18-hour day, 6 days a week. They generally tended to give you Sunday off as a religious day. But factories did weird things like if you didn't work a full hour, you didn't get paid. If you were supposed to start today at 8 o'clock in the morning and you walked in 1 minute late, you worked from 8:01 to 9 o'clock for free. Now if you're thinking, I just wouldn't work, I'm going to sit there, you're fired. If you think, well, I was going to work until 10 o'clock tonight, I'll just work till 10:01 to make up for the missed minute. No, the factory closes at 10 o'clock, you're out the door. Bathrooms were locked, water fountains were off, because if you had to use the bathroom, you had to tell someone that you were walking away from your machine and you wouldn't be paid for that hour. So if you think about it, if it was 11:59 and I really had to go to the bathroom and I go, hey, Mr. Manager Man, I need to pee, and he goes, okay, great, and he unlocks the bathroom door. I walk in there at 11:59, I walk back in here at 12:01, I just worked from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock for free because I hadn't been there for full complete hours. Some factories did this one, I love this one. You guys trust that it takes an hour for the big hand to go around the clock. What if I told you that the office could slow that down and make it take 65 minutes? And then when you hit lunch, speed it up and make your lunch take 20. Well, they did things like that in these factories. They often stripped safety mechanisms off the machines so that people could work faster at the risk of harming themselves or injuring themselves. And the pay was terrible. There was no national minimum wage, and so they could pay you whatever they wanted to, and if you didn't like it, they fired you and they found someone else to take your job. They didn't care about workers. If you were sick, you better show up at work, because if you didn't show up, then, well, you know, you're going to lose your job. And so you would have people, think about this, put this all together, you'd have a 5-year-old working over here, you'd have someone who had a bucket on the ground in front of them because they didn't want to lose an hour's pay, so they're going to pee in the bucket. You got someone sick next to you and barfing, and there's not air conditioning in the factory. It's a lovely place to work. I don't think that's exactly what you wanted your future to be. And again, obviously, you could be easily replaced. So along come unions. This idea that someone has to look out for these workers because they can't look out for themselves as individuals. And so a union is an organization of workers with common needs that fight for the things that they want together. By yourself, you have no power, but as a group, you can get things done, all right? And so they try to attempt to get a power shift. And the way that they do this is when they want something, they threaten the factory that they'll go on strike. Strike means I refuse to work. Or a slowdown strike, where we're just going to move really slow. Or sometimes they would sabotage machines and bust them on purpose. All right. Now these unions fought based on what they called bread and butter issues. Bread and butter issues are the things that everybody wants. Some of those things were shorter work hours, better safety precautions in their places of work, sick days, being able to use the bathroom and get a drink of water. They fought for better pay. And they used something called collective bargaining to get this. It's where one person or a few people would go in and speak for everybody, and everybody got the same thing, unless you were a woman or a minority, and then you got less because of America. All right. Now, some of the early problems that they had, though, were skilled workers, someone who had a job that you had to learn how to do that required an amount of skill and training, didn't want to stick up for unskilled workers, someone who could just walk in and do the job with no training. The skilled workers didn't want to put themselves on the line to save the job of someone that didn't have a skill. Now, two really early unions. The first was called the Knights of Labor. Had to be kept secret because at that point in the country, labor unions were illegal and you could be jailed for being a part of one. It was started by a guy named Uriah Stevens. In the beginning, it only included skilled workers because Stevens didn't see a system where they could stick up for the skilled workers. Generally speaking, the Knights of Labor were really only white men as well. They didn't want to stick up for minorities because no one thought that that was a good idea for some reason because America. Now, when a guy named Terence V. Powderly takes over, he decides to let all workers in. And you have some problems. It causes a little bit of a struggle in the initial stages, but then it gains popularity when people figure out that there is strength in numbers, and by adding more people, you have more power. The idea that if 5 students go into the office and complain about something, they don't get anywhere, but if 300 kids complain about something and refuse to do something, well, now someone's got to listen. Probably the biggest union that comes out of this chapter, though, is called the American Federation of Labor, or AFL. The AFL still exists today, right there. Started by a guy named Samuel Gompers. And Gompers' idea to use collective bargaining was huge at that time. The idea that 1 or 2 people would go in and represent the workforce of possibly not just one factory, but of a trade. So all carpenters would be in the same trade union. All factory workers would be in the same trade union. And those people would all negotiate together. Obviously, unions have been in the spotlight in the last few years because there's been a lot of give and take on both sides of the political fence as far as what unions should and shouldn't have. But obviously, you can feel however you want to feel about that, but these people probably needed someone to stick up for them because they couldn't stick up for themselves. That was just a quick one on working in a factory and unions. We got one more section left on immigration in cities, so we'll see you guys in the last one, I guess, this time.